In June 1967, the war in South Vietnam entered an increasingly intense phase of escalation. After more than 2 years of deploying major combat units into the theater, the United States expanded large-scale search and destroy operations aimed at locating and wearing down the main forces of the People's Army of Vietnam before they could gain the initiative in strategically important areas. One of the key focal points of this strategy was the Dak To Tan Cairn area, located near the tri-border region of Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. This area held exceptional strategic importance, where multiple supply routes from the west converged before branching out toward the central coast and southeastern South Vietnam. Controlling this region not only helped protect U.S. bases at Con Tum, but also made it possible to hinder the movement of the People's Army of Vietnam's main force units. To achieve this objective, the United States launched Operation Greeley in June 1967, committing the 173rd Airborne Brigade, along with supporting units deep into the mountainous jungles around Dak To. On operational maps, Hill 1338 was merely another high point among the countless mountain ridges of the Central Highlands. Yet within just a few days, those slopes would become the scene of one of the fiercest battles of the Vietnam War. On the 20th of June 1967, after several days of conducting Operation Greeley in the Dak To Tan Cairn area, the headquarters of the 173rd Airborne Brigade continued expanding its search operations to the south, where U.S. intelligence believed main force units of the People's Army of Vietnam were operating. The reconnaissance and search mission around Hill 1338 was assigned to the 2nd Battalion, 503rd Infantry Regiment, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Edward A. Partain. Under his command, Companies A and C were airlifted by UH-1 helicopters into small landing zones deep in the jungle before advancing on foot along the ridgelines toward their objective. At the time, the United States had not yet determined the exact strength of the opposing force, post-war U.S. Sources suggest that the People's Army of Vietnam unit directly involved was most likely the 6th Battalion, 24th Regiment, under the B-3 front in the Central Highlands. However, the identity of its field commander has not been confirmed by publicly available sources. Throughout June 20, U.S. forces encountered almost no major combat. The advancing troops repeatedly discovered fresh signs of enemy activity, including jungle trails, campsites, cooking pits, and well-camouflaged defensive positions that had been used only recently. They also found the bodies of several CIDG personnel who had previously gone missing on the mountainside. These discoveries indicated that the opposing force was operating very close by while carefully concealing its position. To Lieutenant Colonel Partain, this suggested that the 2nd Battalion, 503rd Infantry, might already be moving into an area that had been deliberately prepared for a much larger engagement. During the night of June 20 and into the early hours of June 21, the 2 U.S. companies established defensive positions on the slopes of Hill 1338. Observation posts repeatedly reported hearing movement from the dense jungle, but were unable to identify any targets. No attack took place during the night. The prolonged silence led many officers to believe that the enemy was deliberately avoiding a direct engagement. In reality, however, the People's Army of Vietnam continued shadowing the movements of the 2nd Battalion, 503rd Infantry, waiting for a more favorable moment to strike. On June 21, the companies continued expanding their search along the mountain slopes and stream valleys surrounding Hill 1338. The steep terrain, dense multi-layered jungle canopy, and slippery red basalt soil left by frequent rains greatly slowed their advance. In many places, the troops could move only in single file along narrow ridgelines. Visibility was severely restricted by thick vegetation and tangled vines, causing the distance between individual squads to widen repeatedly. Under such conditions, communication between the companies and the battalion headquarters depended primarily on radio. Throughout the day, U.S. forces observed additional signs indicating that the opposing force had established its defensive positions on the mountainsides rather than on the summit itself. This was a characteristic defensive arrangement frequently employed by the People's Army of Vietnam in the Central Highlands. Bunkers, mutually supporting firing positions, and interconnected trench systems were laid out along the likely avenues of approach, allowing the defenders to open fire at close range before rapidly shifting to alternate positions beneath the jungle canopy. This also meant that, should fighting break out, U.S. artillery and air power would find it extremely difficult to achieve their full effectiveness. By the end of June 21, the 2nd Battalion, 503rd Infantry, had still not located the enemy's main position. Nevertheless, the headquarters of the 173rd Airborne Brigade concluded that the Hill 1338 area was most likely being held by a force at least the size of a battalion. Lieutenant Colonel Edward Partain decided that Company A would once again lead the search the following morning, while the remaining companies maintained a close enough distance to maneuver quickly in support if required. At 6:58 a.m. on the 22nd of June 1967, a blanket of mist still covered the slopes of Hill 1338 as Company A, 2nd Battalion, 503rd Infantry Regiment, began moving out from its overnight position. According to Lieutenant Colonel Edward A. Partain's plan, the unit would follow a narrow ridgeline to continue its search mission before returning to the designated assembly point. The column stretched out in single file through the dense jungle. A reconnaissance team led the way, followed by the rifle platoons, radio operators, and the company headquarters. Beneath towering trees that almost completely blocked out the sky, visibility was reduced to only a few dozen meters. The crunch of boots on rotting leaves, the scrape of vines against rucksacks, and the constant chorus of jungle insects were the only sounds echoing across the mountainside. As the lead element crossed a narrow, steep section of the ridge, the entire jungle suddenly erupted with gunfire. Bursts of AK rifles, RPD light machine guns, and machine gun fire poured in from multiple concealed fighting positions, sweeping across the column. Several paratroopers at the front were cut down almost instantly, while those behind instinctively threw themselves into shallow depressions behind tree trunks or against large boulders in search of cover. Within the first few minutes, the marching column, stretching hundreds of meters, had been split into several isolated groups. The crack of gunfire, shouted orders, and urgent transmissions over PRC 2-5 radios merged into a single deafening roar beneath the dense jungle canopy. No one could see the battlefield in its entirety. Beneath the triple-layered jungle canopy, the firing positions of the People's Army of Vietnam revealed themselves only through brief flashes at the muzzles of their weapons before disappearing again. Some positions were only a few dozen meters away, yet remained completely hidden behind thick vegetation, tangled vines, and natural earthen mounds. Many American soldiers were forced to return fire toward the sound of enemy weapons rather than at visible targets. Each time one firing position fell silent under suppressive fire, another would suddenly open up from an entirely different part of the mountainside. The urgent contact report was quickly relayed to battalion headquarters. Lieutenant Colonel Edward A. Partain immediately ordered the remaining units to move forward, while requesting artillery support and armed helicopters. But on Hill 1338, the opposing forces were simply too close together. Forward observers had to adjust each artillery salvo with an error margin of only a few dozen meters to avoid striking Company A itself. Overhead, UH-1 gunships repeatedly descended to low altitude in search of targets. From the cockpit, however, the pilots saw nothing but an unbroken sea of green covering the mountainside. Only occasionally would a faint puff of gun smoke appear before disappearing almost instantly beneath the jungle canopy. Meanwhile, Company A was effectively pinned in place. The trail they had just followed was now covered by enemy fire. Advancing meant charging directly into the enemy's kill zone, while withdrawing required crossing the very same area dominated by machine gun fire. Many platoons lost visual contact with one another and could determine the location of friendly units only through responses over the radio. Medics crawled forward 1 meter at a time through the gunfire to reach the wounded. First aid was administered behind tree trunks shredded by bullets, while casualties could be dragged back only a short distance whenever the enemy's fire briefly slackened. At 8:10 a.m., after holding Company A in place for more than an hour, the People's Army of Vietnam suddenly launched its first assault against the company's 2 lead platoons. From defensive positions established along the mountainside, numerous assault teams advanced simultaneously, using the terrain to close the distance. The battle quickly turned into a series of firefights at extremely close range. In some places, the two sides were separated by only a few tree trunks. Grenades, M79 grenade launchers, rifles, and machine guns fired almost continuously. Whenever a group of American soldiers managed to push forward a few meters in an attempt to expand their line, they were met by fire from another bunker already waiting ahead. Around 8:50 a.m., a second assault was launched with even greater intensity. Fire from multiple directions converged on the center of Company A's formation. The gunfire became almost uninterrupted. Bullets snapped branches, tore through the red basalt soil, and sent splinters of wood and fragments of rock flying across the mountainside. Several American machine guns had to undergo repeated barrel changes after sustained high-volume firing to hold back the attackers. Ammunition bearers often had to throw themselves flat the moment they reached the gunners as bursts of enemy fire swept just overhead. Behind the front line, Battalion headquarters received a constant stream of requests for reinforcements, medical evacuation, and ammunition resupply. Transport helicopters were ordered into the area repeatedly, but were unable to land because no landing zone could be secured. Some pilots could do nothing more than circle outside the battle area while, on the ground, the wounded remained sheltered inside shell craters or behind large tree stumps. By midday, many platoons had been fighting continuously for hours. As their ammunition dwindled, their water supplies ran low, and all resupply depended on whether a safe approach route could be opened from the rear. Realizing that Company A was unlikely to break out of the encirclement on its own, Lieutenant Colonel Partain ordered Company C to move forward immediately to relieve the trapped unit. However, the reinforcing company soon found itself fighting while advancing. The rugged jungle terrain split its formation into several small elements, reducing its rate of advance far below expectations. Each time they crossed a ridgeline or a dry stream bed, they were forced to halt and establish security, never knowing how many more concealed ambush positions lay ahead. At 2:20 p.m., after hours of continuous fighting, Company C finally succeeded in breaking through to Company A's position. The two units quickly reorganized their formations, collected the wounded, and expanded their defensive perimeter. By this point, the slopes of Hill 1,338 had been torn apart by hundreds of artillery shells and rockets. Large trees had been blasted apart, destroyed bunkers lay scattered among fresh shell craters, and the entire area was filled with the smell of gunpowder, damp earth, and burned wood. By 6:50 p.m., as darkness began to fall, most of the wounded and the surviving members of Company A were finally evacuated from the battlefield. As night closed over Hill 1,338, the gunfire gradually faded. Yet the day's fighting had demonstrated that Operation Greeley was no longer simply a search and destroy campaign. In just a few hours, a single mountainside, deep in the jungles of the Central Highlands, had become a brutal battle of attrition, where rugged terrain, carefully prepared defensive positions, and close-range ambushes significantly reduced the firepower and mobility that formed the foundation of U.S. Army doctrine. On the morning of June 23, Companies B and C returned to the site of the ambush to clear the battlefield. the work progressed slowly. Many areas still faced the threat of sniper fire, forcing search teams to move forward cautiously while maintaining security. Across the mountainside lay trees shredded by gunfire, fresh artillery craters, and destroyed defensive positions. U.S. Troops continued searching for soldiers who were still missing while recovering weapons, equipment, and the bodies of those killed in action. According to the recollections of many veterans who fought in the battle, it was one of the heaviest mornings they experienced during their service in Vietnam.
The North Vietnamese or the Viet Cong did not adhere to any rules whatsoever. The Geneva Convention states that medical personnel, corpsmen, medics, what have you, are not supposed to be fired on. Early in the war, about the time I first got there, we were wearing the armbands with the Red Cross on it. All that did was make us a better target. North Vietnam did not sign the Geneva Convention, so it's a moot point. We took off the armbands very quickly and never wore them again. We were also supposed to be unarmed. I carried a shotgun and a pistol when I was in the field.
At the conclusion of the Battle of the Slopes, the 173rd Airborne Brigade had suffered 79 soldiers killed in action. It was one of the heaviest losses the brigade had sustained in a single engagement since its deployment to Vietnam. On the People's Army of Vietnam side, U.S., reports confirmed the recovery of 106 bodies on the battlefield, while several subsequent operational reports estimated that enemy casualties may have reached as many as 475. Vietnam has not released corresponding casualty figures, and the true scale of the defenders' losses remains a subject of debate among historians and researchers. From a tactical standpoint, the Battle of the Slopes did not result in lasting control of Hill 1,338 by either side. U.S. forces completed the recovery of their personnel before continuing Operation Greeley in other areas, while the People's Army of Vietnam also withdrew after achieving its objective of delaying and inflicting losses on the opposing force. Nevertheless, the battle had a profound impact on how the U.S. command assessed the Central Highlands battlefield. The fighting on Hill 1,338 demonstrated that the opposing force was no longer relying solely on small-scale hit-and-run attacks, but had developed defensive and ambush systems capable of confronting American airmobile units directly in mountainous jungle terrain. The Battle of the Slopes also became an important precursor to what would unfold at Dak To only a few months later. Throughout the summer of 1967, Operation Greeley continued to witness large-scale engagements between the 173rd Airborne Brigade, the U.S., 4th Infantry Division, and the main force units of the B-3 Front. By the end of the year, these clashes had culminated in the Battle of Dak To, one of the fiercest battles fought in the Central Highlands during the Vietnam War. Hill 1,338 was neither the highest hill nor the largest battle of the Vietnam War. Yet during 3 days in June 1967, it revealed a reality that both sides understood all too well. In the jungles of the Central Highlands, superiority in numbers or firepower was only part of the equation. Terrain, concealment, patience in setting ambushes, and the decisions made during the opening minutes of an engagement were often the factors that determined the outcome of an entire battle. For this reason, the Battle of the Slopes remains widely regarded as one of the most representative examples of jungle warfare in Vietnam during 1967.